Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the shop. If you've been following this new space, you've probably noticed there's a little bit of echo in the sound. Here's some of the first video I ever shot in this space. This is my new shop. Does it look big? Because it's pretty big. Whew! That is way too much reverb. The solution is these sound-absorbing panels that you see behind me. They've got a soft surface that's made to diffuse the sound, to absorb it as it comes in, instead of reflecting it, so the sound can't bounce around the room and into my microphone. This gives me much cleaner audio. Now, this is a big space, so I'm going to need at least 20 panels to treat the walls and ceiling. And that's a big job. We're going to need to get the materials, prototype the panels, set up a production system, and do all the fabrication without wasting a lot of time because I need to get back to woodworking. The core of these panels is this rock wool insulation. Even professionally made sound panels generally use rock wool. It's not very toxic, but you do need gloves and breathing protection to handle it. The insulation is floppy, so you need to build a frame to hold it, and you need to keep the insulation fibers from getting into the air, so the panels are generally wrapped in fabric. I watched all the videos and read all the articles on making DIY sound panels, but I still needed to prototype at least one of these before going into production. Here's my assistant, Brannon, measuring the insulation. These pieces are made for audio work, so they come cut to size, and we're going to build a frame right around each piece. We've cut 2-inch wide pieces of particle board, and we're stapling them at the corners with an 1.25 inch staple. That part's easy, but we don't have enough blue fabric to cover the front and back of each panel, and we need all the insulation covered. So we're covering the back with weed cloth, which you can pick up at any garden center. And it's cheap, maybe a little too cheap. I put a bunch of staples into the end of this piece, and it just pulled free. The cloth is too soft, and the staples go right through. But if you add a plywood cleat to each end and staple through the cleat and the cloth, everything holds together. The cleats also make this thin wooden frame much more rigid, so they're worth adding no matter what kind of cloth you use. Now we can wrap the whole thing in blue cloth. This cloth is specially made for sound panels. It's acoustically transparent, which means it won't reflect sound, but it's also tough enough that you can staple it directly to the wooden frame and it won't tear. Even more important, this stuff is flame resistant, which is super important when you're hanging a bunch of them on the walls of a wood shop. The cloth was pretty expensive, and you can just use a loose fabric like burlap, but I spent some extra money for safety. The last step is adding this little strip of wood we called a truss. Here's the back of one of the panels, and you can see the truss just connects one side to the other, and it's held in with screws. A lot of these panels are going to hang horizontally, just like this, and that means all the weight of the insulation is going to be resting on this bottom piece here, and that's just 3/4 inch white pine. Over time, the weight of the insulation might cause that piece to bow a lot. So by tying the bottom to the top with the truss, we're distributing that weight, and we should really cut down on sagging, even if these things are hanging on the wall for years. As we completed the first panel, we learned how to deal with the flimsy weed cloth, how to pull the blue fabric tight for a clean and wrinkle-free look, and how to assemble a sturdy panel. The plywood cleats help a lot, but we figured out that staples at the corners of the frame aren't enough. You need screws for this construction, and screws do not work in particle board, which is obvious if you think about it just for a second. We switched to solid pine for the rest of the frames, and for each corner we used a dab of glue, 2 staples, and a deck screw in the middle. This combination is strong and fast to assemble. It took us most of a day to make 2 prototypes, but by the end, we were ready for production. Of course, production means having all the tools and materials ready to go before we start. We're making 24 panels, and each one has 7 individual wooden pieces, for a total of 168 pieces that all need to be cut and shaped before we can get going. This is all table saw work, so I sent Brannon home and got to it. One good thing about this project is I can use up some scrap materials left over from building the workshop floor. I start by ripping all the pine into 2-inch strips. That takes a while, but I need a lot of frame stock. For the cleats, I can use any old junk, so I dug out all my oddball scraps and cut those into 3-inch strips. A lot of 3-inch strips. With all the stock ripped, I restacked it and got ready to cross-cut everything to length. You can see I made one piece and just glued it to my cross-cut sled. I line up the end of the piece I need and run it through the saw. Perfect. Every time. I do the same thing even for the long sides of the frame, and I stick a couple of offcuts on the table saw to catch each piece as it falls. Tricks like this make production a lot easier. It took me 5 hours to make all of these pieces, double-check the amounts, and organize them. But now, we're ready to make panels. The next day was production day. I got a second helper, my buddy Rennie, and since I was paying 2 people, I really wanted to knock out all 24 panels in one day. So everything we did was optimized for efficiency. First, we make multiple workstations. My joiner's bench is too small to fit a panel, so we add a temporary top. And of course, my outfeed table is already a good size. Next, we want to prep the parts as much as possible. We're going to be screwing through all of these end pieces, so it's better to drill all of them before we start assembly. Brannon is over at the drill press, where we've made a fast jig, so each hole is perfectly centered and just the right distance from the end. While Brannon drills the end pieces, Rennie and I are cutting all of the fabric. We're using a piece of 2x4 as a big straight edge, and we've drawn reference lines on the table so we can line everything up and make the cut, and every piece comes out the same. It's the same thing for the blue cloth. We're just cutting bigger pieces. I bought fresh razor blades just for this project, so the work goes fast, and soon enough, we've got all the fabric cut and stacked. It's time to assemble. We started by making all the frames. With the pieces cut, we could just lay them out, dab on a little glue, and then I throw staples into the corners, leaving room in the middle so that Brannon can drill the pilot holes and Rennie can drive screws. We get a rhythm going, and the frames stack up fast. Now we're ready to do the final assembly. It goes like this. Throw down the blue cloth and put a frame on top. Then add the insulation. It's a snug fit, but that's good. Then a piece of weed cloth, a pair of cleats, and some staples. The blue cloth comes up over the end, gets stapled in place, and we take a second to fold the corner neatly before stapling that in place. We pull the cloth tight and run staples down one side, rotate the whole thing, and then staple the last side. Then we screw on the truss, do a quick inspection, and it's on to the next one. As we repeated the process over and over, we just naturally got into a rhythm, and without even trying, it became a sort of dance. It was a long, hard day, but we made all 24 panels. All of them clean looking, all of them sturdy. The next day, Brannon and I hung the panels. You can get fancy with this, but we just put a couple of screws into the wall and slid the frame up over them. It was really easy. If you've never done this before, it might look like we're putting the panels up at random, but that's not it. One of my patrons is a PhD of acoustical science, or something like that, and he did a full video consultation and told me where to place each panel. These are optimized for narration, so we're putting them at roughly mouth level and hanging a lot of them horizontally because that will cover more of the space that my voice is going to bounce off of. Some people recommend spacing the panels out from the wall, but that mostly increases bass absorption. That's useful in a music studio, but it wouldn't really help me here. After we finished the walls, we also hung panels from the ceiling, and we might need to do more of those. This is a big room, and it's going to take a little time to get the sound treatment really dialed in. So, did we actually accomplish anything? Well, here's the sound before we did anything. So, here's the untreated shop on a lavalier mic, and here's the sound today. It's a pretty big improvement. Now, I admit it's not perfect, but this is a big space, and I have 5 panels left over that I can add to specific spots as I find more echo. It's a little bit of a work in progress, but that's okay. Since I've been in this new shop, I've been trying to share costs with people because I know I'm not the only one who wants to get out of the basement and be in a more professional space. So I got a quote on having these panels made for me by a company that specializes in these. And they said they could make all 24 panels for $2,000. And I was like, that's a lot of money. So I looked up the insulation and the blue cloth, which was mostly what I had to buy. And those two things only cost $1,000. And so instantly I was like, I'm gonna save $1,000. I'm gonna do this myself. That was kind of short-sighted of me, though. I didn't think about how I had to provide the wood, the glue, the screws, the staples, the weed cloth. I had to pay 2 assistants, and the project took 4 to 5 days, depending on how you count it. When you finally do all the math, I didn't really save any money. It might have actually cost me a little bit of more money to make these myself, especially just in lost time. So if you're looking at doing something like this, take more time than I did doing the math. Factor in the value of the stuff that you have to provide out of the stock on hand. Factor in the value of your time and how much you might have to pay an assistant. If you're doing this sort of thing as a business, you have to be much more detail-oriented and think more critically about these things. I pulled the trigger a little too fast. Don't be like me. I'm not a good role model. And anyway, as I'm doing all this stuff and talking about the money, you might be wondering, well, Rex, how do you afford this stuff? Does making the YouTube videos pay for all the stuff I see? And no, not even close. The money I get from making the videos is pretty small. I think everybody knows that by now. All of this stuff is possible because of my patrons on Patreon. The support that I get from my patrons has allowed me to have this shop, build these panels, make a video just about the process, and tell you about the mistakes I made and the shortcomings. My patrons give me the freedom to make exactly the kind of videos I want to make without a sponsor telling me what to make, which wouldn't help anything. So if you'd like to be one of the people who makes these videos possible, go on over to patreon.com/Rex Krueger and check out all the rewards I have for the people who make these videos possible. I'll be back next week with a woodworking project because it's been way too long. I hope you'll join me. Thanks for watching.